When billionaire Charles Langston took his last breath, everyone expected the will to change their lives. No one expected it to destroy them. Welcome to today's story. Tell me in the comments, what time is it? And which country are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an adventure. The Langston estate woke that morning beneath a bruised sky. Clouds pressed low over the sprawling property like a warning, heavy and gray, as if the heavens themselves knew what was coming. The wind rattled the tall windows, sending the lace curtains trembling like nervous hands. Inside, everything gleamed. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the portraits of ancestors who stared down in judgment. It was the kind of wealth that didn't whisper, it announced itself. And through it all moved Evelyn Brooks. Dressed in her neat, gray uniform, she polished the marble foyer with the same quiet dedication she had given for 25 years. Her movements were graceful, practiced, each stroke of her cloth even, steady, patient. She was invisible, and yet she saw everything. The way Mrs. Margaret Langston's voice rose slightly when she was nervous. The way Mr. Charles Langston's medicine went untouched on the bedside table. The way the house, for all its size, had grown heavy with secrets. Evelyn had started here at 19, fresh-faced and soft-spoken, the daughter of a nurse who'd always taught her that dignity was free, even if respect was not. Over 2 decades later, she had become the quiet backbone of the Langston household. The one who remembered birthdays when the family forgot, who picked up the pieces after their arguments, who saw them at their best and their worst, and stayed anyway. But this morning felt different. From the top floor, voices echoed, low, tense, muffled through the walls. Margaret Langston was in her husband's study again, speaking with the family lawyer. Evelyn didn't mean to listen, but the words floated down the staircase. Posthumous asset management. We need to ensure the transfer is seamless before he gets any ideas. Evelyn frowned. She wiped the same section of marble twice, not because it needed it, but because her mind did. Charles Langston's ideas had built empires. The man was a legend in Charleston, a media magnate who turned one local radio station into a national network. But now he was a shadow of that man. His once booming voice had thinned to a whisper. His gray eyes, once sharp as knives, were tired, weary, almost haunted. A heavy door opened upstairs. The lawyer exited, head down, briefcase tight in hand. Margaret followed, her heels clicking like gunfire against the marble. Her elegance was as sharp as her temper. Flawless curls, diamond earrings, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Evelyn," she said coolly, descending the staircase. "Make sure Charles gets his medication. He's been difficult." "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn curtsied slightly, an old habit she could never shake, and made her way up the grand staircase. As she passed the family portraits, she paused at one, Charles, Margaret, and their 3 children, Andrew, Clara, and Michael, taken 20 years ago. They were picture perfect. Andrew with his father's broad shoulders, Clara already posing like a magazine cover, and Michael, barely 8 then, with shy eyes that mirrored his father's. Now they were all grown and on their way back to the estate. The news had gone out. Charles Langston is dying. By mid-morning, the sound of expensive cars crunching over gravel filled the long driveway. Evelyn peered through the foyer window. First came Andrew, stepping out of a silver Bentley, phone pressed to his ear, shouting about stock trades even before he crossed the threshold. He hugged his mother loosely, eyes darting around the mansion as if mentally cataloging everything he now considered his. Then Clara arrived in a red sports car, designer sunglasses, designer pout. She swept into the house like perfume and ice, muttering, "God, this place smells like disinfectant and regret." And finally, Michael, the youngest. His car was older, his eyes softer, but even from the window, Evelyn could see the exhaustion written in his face. Of all of them, he was the only one who met her gaze through the glass and smiled faintly. She smiled back. The house was full again, but there was no warmth. Only waiting. Upstairs, Charles Langston refused to take his medication. Dr. Hale had tried, but the old man had shaken his head. Not yet, Charles said hoarsely, staring toward the doorway. Not until Evelyn's here. When Evelyn entered his room, the air changed. The beeping of the monitors, the slow drip of the four. Everything seemed to quiet. Charles's hand, frail and trembling, reached for hers. "Good morning, Mr. Langston," she said softly. He smiled faintly, but there was something wild in his eyes, something urgent. His voice was rough, pulled from deep within him. "Evelyn, there's something I should have told you 25 years ago." For a heartbeat, she thought she misheard. "What do you mean, sir?" Before he could answer, Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" "He needs his rest." But Charles didn't look at his wife. He didn't even blink. His fingers tightened around Evelyn's wrist with surprising strength. "You have a right to know," he rasped. And then, crash. Margaret's crystal glass fell from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sharp sound echoed through the silent mansion like a gunshot. Evelyn froze. Margaret's eyes widened, her face pale with something between fear and fury. "Charles," she whispered, voice trembling, What are you talking about?" But the old man only closed his eyes, a thin, knowing smile ghosting across his lips. Outside, thunder rumbled across the dark sky, low and distant, like the growl of something waking. In that moment, everyone in the Langston house felt it. A secret was coming, and it was big enough to destroy them all. The sky never cleared that afternoon. Rain drummed steadily against the tall windows of the Langston estate, turning the manicured gardens outside into blurred strokes of green and gray. Inside, the mansion felt heavier than ever, like the walls themselves were waiting for something dreadful to happen. At exactly noon, Mr. Harlan Pierce, the Langstons' longtime attorney, arrived. He was a meticulous man, silver hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and a leather briefcase that looked older than some of the furniture in the room. When the butler announced him, no one moved at first. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed louder than usual. In the living room, Margaret Langston sat perfectly poised on a velvet couch, her posture as sharp as her diamonds. She was the picture of calm, though her fingers drummed nervously on the armrest. Andrew, standing behind her, scrolled absently through his phone. Clara twirled the stem of her wine glass, pretending to be uninterested. Michael lingered near the fireplace, gazed distant, uneasy. And then, at the top of the grand staircase, Charles Langston appeared, frail, pale, and flanked by his nurse. His steps were slow, but his presence was commanding. The family fell silent. "Father," Margaret said sweetly, rising to her feet, "you should be resting. You're not well enough for this." "Sit down, Margaret," he rasped, cutting her off. His voice, though weak, carried the authority that had built an empire. "I called for Mr. Pierce because it's time, and Evelyn will stay." The words landed like a slap. Evelyn Brooks stood near the far wall, hands clasped in front of her, unsure if she should speak. She had been tidying the study when Charles's nurse came to fetch her. Now, standing before the entire Langston family, she felt exposed. Like an intruder in a home she'd spent most of her life keeping spotless. Margaret's painted smile faltered. "Evelyn," she repeated, as if the very name left a bad taste on her tongue. "Surely, Charles, this is private family business. The help doesn't need to be present." But Charles only looked at his wife, eyes hollow but unyielding. "Evelyn stays," he said again. "She's been part of this family longer than you remember. What I have to say concerns her directly." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Dad, this is absurd. You're not thinking clearly." Charles gave a thin, tired smile. "I've never been clearer in my life." Mr. Pierce cleared his throat. "Mr. Langston, are you certain you want everyone present? The new will contains significant changes." Charles nodded. "That's precisely why they should all hear it." The air in the room changed. Everyone could feel it. Margaret straightened, her composure cracking just slightly. "Changes? What changes?" Charles didn't answer. He gestured to the lawyer instead. "Begin." Mr. Pierce hesitated for a brief moment, adjusting his glasses. Then he reached into his briefcase and drew out a thick stack of papers, the kind that carried weight not just in pages, but in consequences. The sound of the clasp snapping open seemed deafening in the silence. He unfolded the top document and began to read. His voice, calm and steady, filled the room. I, Charles Franklin Langston, being of sound mind and full understanding, hereby declare this to be my final will and testament. The opening lines were standard, almost boring, until they weren't. As Mr. Pierce continued, the tension mounted. Margaret leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Andrew crossed his arms. Clara's grip on her wine glass tightened. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. To my wife, Margaret Langston, I leave the property at Seabrook Island in a monetary trust to be determined at the executor's discretion. Margaret's eyes flickered. That wasn't what the old will said. To my children, Andrew, Clara, and Michael Langston, I leave business shares totaling 15% of the Langston Media Group to be divided equally among them. Andrew's head shot up. 15%? That can't be right. But Mr. Pierce didn't stop. The remaining estate, including the Langston Mansion, its assets, and controlling shares of Langston Media Group, are to be transferred to Miss Evelyn Brooks upon my passing. The room detonated. What? Margaret's voice cracked. Her body lurched forward as if she'd been struck. The color drained from her face. Evelyn, the maid. Clara's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. You've lost your mind, she gasped. Andrew slammed a hand on the desk. She's been manipulating you, Dad. Feeding you lies while you're weak. This is insanity. Evelyn took a step back, her pulse racing. Mr. Langston, she stammered, there must be some mistake. But Charles raised a trembling hand. His breathing grew shallow, but his eyes were clear, sharp, even. There's no mistake, he said. This house was built on lies. And before I die, the truth will live here once more. The words froze everyone in place. Margaret clutched her chest, her voice trembling with outrage. You can't possibly mean. Charles cut her off again, voice stronger than before, like a man fueled by the last surge of purpose. Evelyn Brooks is not your maid, he said, each word slow and deliberate. She's my daughter. Silence. No one breathed. No one moved. Then chaos. Margaret stumbled backward, her manicured hand flying to her pearls. You're what? She gasped before collapsing into the couch. Clara screamed, That's impossible. While Andrew shouted, We'll contest this. Every word. Even Michael stood frozen, his face pale, eyes darting between his father and Evelyn like he was trying to understand how his world had just been ripped in half. Evelyn felt dizzy. The room spun. Her voice broke through the noise, soft but steady. Sir, please don't. Not like this. Charles turned his tired eyes toward her, eyes that looked painfully familiar now that she really saw them. It's time you knew, Evelyn, he said quietly. You were born of love, not shame. And I won't take this truth to my grave. And then, boom, a lightning strike cracked across the sky, shaking the house. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. Darkness swallowed the Langston Mansion. The storm outside roared louder, echoing the chaos within. And in that thick, suffocating blackness, only one truth remained clear. The secret that had been buried for 25 years was finally free. The rain hadn't stopped. It crashed against the windows and sheets, turning the night into a storm that felt alive, angry, electric, and relentless. Lightning flashed across the estate, illuminating the chaos inside the Langston Mansion like snapshots of madness. Margaret's scream still echoed through the hallways. Clara sobbed into her hands. Andrew paced like a caged animal, muttering curses under his breath. And Evelyn Brooks stood frozen, her world collapsing in slow motion. The lights flickered back on, revealing a scene that didn't feel real. The elegant living room, usually pristine, was a mess of shattered glass, overturned chairs, and spilled wine that looked disturbingly like blood on the marble floor. Everyone calmed down. Mr. Pierce, the lawyer, shouted over the storm. But no one listened. Margaret lunged toward Charles's wheelchair, eyes wild, voice trembling with rage. What kind of cruel joke is this, Charles? Our maid? Your daughter? Charles didn't flinch. His breathing was shallow, but his expression was one of weary defiance. "It's not a joke," he said quietly. "It's the truth I should have told decades ago." Evelyn shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "Mr. Langston, please. I don't understand. Why now? Why me?" He looked at her with a mixture of guilt and tenderness. "Because I couldn't die with a lie still on my tongue." Margaret spun around, pointing at Evelyn with trembling fingers. "You little snake. You've been plotting this from the start, haven't you? Playing innocent while crawling into my husband's good graces." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I never asked for this. I didn't even know." Andrew stepped forward, his face flushed with fury. "DNA, Dad. That's what we need. Let's see some proof before we let the maid rewrite our family history." Charles exhaled slowly. "Already done." He motioned to Mr. Pierce. "Show them." The lawyer, reluctantly, opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. Inside were official documents stamped and signed, DNA test results. He handed them to Andrew, who snatched them like evidence in a crime. Andrew's eyes darted over the paper. His jaw clenched. This can't be right. But it was. The tests were irrefutable. The same blood ran through both their veins. Margaret's voice broke into a shrill laugh that quickly dissolved into sobs. "You've humiliated me, Charles. You've humiliated us. 25 years of loyalty. And this is how you repay me." Charles turned his gaze toward her, his tone soft but cutting. "Loyalty," he coughed weakly. "You stopped loving me the moment the money started talking louder than I could." Her hand trembled. "You'll regret this," she whispered. But the old man only looked at Evelyn. "I already have." A sharp silence followed. The storm outside roared louder, thunder cracking so close it rattled the chandeliers. Evelyn stood there, clutching her trembling hands, lost in a blur of memories that suddenly made sense. Painfully, perfectly sense. Flashback, 25 years ago. Her mother, Delilah Brooks, had always been strong. A nurse with warm brown eyes and a laugh that could light up even the darkest hospital hallway. Evelyn remembered her telling stories about a kind man she once cared for, a man who promised her love, then vanished when she needed him most. Delilah had died young, never naming him. Evelyn remembered how Charles Langston had always gone out of his way for her, giving her raises when she didn't ask, remembering her birthday when no one else did, defending her whenever Margaret scolded her for small mistakes. She had thought it was kindness, gratitude, but now she saw it differently. It had been guilt, deep, unspoken, bone-deep guilt. Back in the present, Margaret was pacing, muttering under her breath. The children watched her like spectators afraid their queen had gone mad. "You will not steal my family or my fortune," she hissed finally, eyes locked on Evelyn. "Do you hear me? I built this house. I endured every humiliation. You think you can waltz in and take it all?" Evelyn's voice was soft but steady. "I don't want your fortune, Mrs. Langston. I never did." Margaret leaned in close, her perfume choking the air between them. "You already have more than you deserve." Andrew slammed the papers down on the table. "I'm filing for a legal injunction first thing tomorrow. This will never hold. Dad's not in his right mind." Clara stood by the bar, refilling her glass with shaking hands. "And I'll make sure every headline in the country knows exactly who Evelyn Brooks is. Let's see how long your saintly image lasts once people know the maid-turned-heir story." Evelyn looked at her, tears glinting but her spine straight. "You can try to destroy me, Clara, but you can't change the truth." Only Michael remained silent. He hadn't moved since the reading. He stared at Evelyn, at the woman who had practically raised him, with an expression that was part heartbreak, part awe. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "All these years," he murmured, "you were more family to me than any of them." Margaret turned sharply. "Michael," but he didn't stop. "You never cared about any of us, Mother. You only cared about what we looked like to the world." Margaret's eyes flashed with fury, but before she could answer, thunder exploded overhead, shaking the chandelier. Then came a different sound, metal scraping against metal. Everyone turned. Charles was coughing violently, struggling to breathe. The nurse rushed to his side, but his trembling hand pointed weakly toward his office door. "Safe," he wheezed. "In the office. There's something you all need to see." The lawyer frowned. "A safe, Mr. Langston?" Charles nodded faintly. "A second will." The room erupted again. Margaret shouting, Andrew demanding answers, Clara breaking into hysterical laughter. Margaret's voice rose above the chaos. "Where is it?" she screamed. Charles's gaze shifted to Evelyn, just for a second. Then his hand fell limp. The nurse checked his pulse. "He's alive," she said softly, "but he's fading fast." Margaret turned toward the office door with eyes blazing. "If that safe holds another will," she hissed, "then that's where I'll start." Evelyn could feel the storm trembling through the mansion as Margaret stormed away, her heels clicking against the marble floor that now glistened like blood. Outside, lightning split the sky again, white, violent, final. The house of Langston was falling apart, and Evelyn Brooks, the maid-turned heiress, had just become its center. The Langston mansion had always been big, but after the truth came out, it felt enormous. Every hallway echoed. Every corner whispered. The air itself seemed to hum with suspicion and fear. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Brooks was no longer the maid. She was the heiress. But instead of freedom, it felt like a sentence. The mansion had turned against her. Rooms she'd once cleaned were now locked. The servants she'd worked beside for decades wouldn't meet her eyes. Even the butler, Mr. Grayson, avoided speaking to her unless absolutely necessary. Margaret's influence was everywhere, poison disguised as perfume. She'd managed to twist the entire staff into believing Evelyn was the villain. The whispers followed her everywhere. She trapped him. She used him. She's after the money. Evelyn learned to walk silently again. Not as a servant this time, but as a target. The storm outside had passed, but inside, another one brewed, cold, invisible, cruel. Margaret's campaign against Evelyn started subtly. First, a few phone calls to old friends in society circles. Then leaked sources to gossip columns. Within days, headlines appeared. Langston heiress or gold digger? Inside the scandal, shocking Charleston. Maid or mistress? Questions surround Billionaire's final will. Photographers parked outside the gates. Journalists camped in cars, waiting for a glimpse of the mysterious woman who stole a fortune. Margaret played her role perfectly. Grieving widow, betrayed wife, victim of her husband's confused generosity. On one live interview, she dabbed her eyes delicately with a silk handkerchief and said, "My husband was ill. His mind wasn't clear. That woman took advantage of his weakness. I only hope the courts will see the truth." Evelyn watched the broadcast from the small TV in the servants' quarters, her own face blurred on the screen. Her hand shook as she turned it off. Even Clara had joined the war. One morning, Evelyn woke to find police officers at the estate holding a search warrant. Someone had reported stolen jewelry, Margaret's diamond bracelet, conveniently missing from her safe. The officers found it 2 hours later, tucked neatly in Evelyn's dresser drawer. She stared at it in horror, her voice trembling. "That's not mine. I've never even been in Mrs. Langston's dressing room." But Clara's voice came sharp and sweet from behind the officers. Funny how thieves always say that. Evelyn's cheeks burned. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, judging, doubting. When the police left with an apology, saying they couldn't press charges without more proof, Clara smirked. "You'll slip up eventually," she whispered. "You don't belong here. And we both know it." A few nights later, Evelyn sat in her small room at the back of the mansion, the same room she'd lived in since her 20s. Only now, she wasn't allowed anywhere else. Margaret had made sure of that. The lawyer had told her she had full legal rights to the house. But Margaret controlled the atmosphere, and that was far more powerful. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating her. The once familiar smell of lemon polish and old books now made her stomach twist. That's when she heard the soft knock. "Come in," she said quietly. The door opened just enough for Michael to slip inside. He looked different, tired, older somehow, though only a few days had passed. "I had to see you," he said, closing the door behind him. Evelyn blinked. "Your mother wouldn't like that." He gave a bitter laugh. My mother doesn't like anything that doesn't serve her." For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain tapped gently against the window, a softer echo of the storm that had started everything. Finally, he said, "I remember when I was little. You were the only one who came to my school play. You sat in the back and clapped the loudest." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You forgot your lines that day." "Yeah," he said, grinning. "And you mouthed them from your seat so I could keep going." She looked away, eyes misty. "You were just a boy. I didn't want you to feel alone." He stepped closer. "You were always more of a mother than she ever was." The words hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt warmth. Someone saw her. Not the maid, not the heiress, just her. But was also dangerous. She could feel it. Margaret would destroy him if she knew. "Michael, you shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Your mother." "I don't care," he said firmly. "She's lied to us our whole lives. I need to know the truth." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded slowly. "So do I." Later that night, as the mansion slept, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in her room. The faint smell of Margaret's perfume lingered in the air, a sweet, suffocating floral scent. Uneasy, she dropped to her knees beside the bed and checked the floor. That's when her fingers brushed against something thin, papery, hidden beneath the wooden slats. She reached down and pulled out a small bundle of old letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, familiar. Charles's handwriting. Her breath caught. The top envelope was addressed in looping script. "To my daughter." Evelyn's hands trembled as she unfolded the first letter. "Evelyn, my dearest child, I have carried this truth for far too long. Your mother, Delilah, was the love I never deserved. I thought I was protecting you by staying away, but I see now I was only protecting myself." Tears blurred her vision. There were 5 letters in total, each one filled with regret, longing, and a desperate promise to one day tell her the truth. But one note stopped her cold. "Margaret found the first letter I wrote you. She burned it. She warned me never to speak of you again, but I will not let my silence be your curse." Evelyn pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. The realization hit like thunder. Margaret had known all along. All those years, watching her scrub the floors, polish the furniture, raise her children, and Margaret had kept the secret buried, guarding her empire with lies. Evelyn folded the letters back carefully, her heart pounding. The war wasn't just silent anymore. It had begun, and this time, Evelyn Brooks wasn't going to hide. The Langston Dining Hall had hosted hundreds of lavish dinners over the years, charity galas, political fundraisers, and holiday feasts that filled the mansion with laughter and champagne. But that night, the long mahogany table might as well have been a war zone. A dozen silver candles flickered down the center, their light dancing against crystal glasses and porcelain plates. The smell of roasted duck and aged wine filled the air, but no one was hungry. Every breath felt tight, every glance sharp. Charles Langston sat at the head of the table, pale but dignified in a black suit. His oxygen tube looped discreetly beneath his nose. His eyes, though tired, burned with something fierce, like a man holding on just long enough to finish his mission. Across from him sat Margaret, shimmering in a deep emerald dress, her posture perfect, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. To her right, Andrew, jaw set, scrolling his phone under the table until Margaret shot him a glare. Clara, flawless in red, stared into her wine glass, expression unreadable. Michael sat quietly, his fork untouched, gaze flicking between them all. And at the far end, where the servants usually sat when cleaning up after dinner, sat Evelyn Brooks. Not in her uniform tonight, but in a simple navy dress Michael had insisted she wear. Still, she felt out of place, like an intruder in a family that wanted her gone. The silence stretched until Charles cleared his throat. "I appreciate you all for coming." Margaret's voice was smooth and cold. "It wasn't exactly optional, Charles. You said it was urgent." He smiled faintly. "It is. I don't intend to leave this table without the truth being spoken." Evelyn shifted in her chair, uneasy. She could feel the tension building like static. Charles's voice was steady but deliberate as he turned his gaze to Andrew. "Let's begin with my eldest," he said. "You've been embezzling from the company for 3 years." The room froze. Andrew's head snapped up. "That's ridiculous." Charles slid a thin folder across the table. "Financial records don't lie. Transfers to an offshore account under the name A. Lang. The board will receive them tomorrow morning." Margaret's face drained of color. "Charles, don't do this here." But he wasn't listening. His gaze shifted to Clara. "My darling daughter," he said softly, "your public image as the perfect socialite. How's that working out with your business partner's wife? Does she know you've been seeing her husband for the past 6 months?" Clara's wine glass clinked against the table. "You had someone following me?" He smiled sadly. "I didn't have to. He told me himself. He called last week, begging me to keep you out of the press." Clara's lip quivered. "You're humiliating me." "No," Charles said quietly. "I'm saving you from becoming your mother." Margaret stiffened. Her fork stopped midair. "Excuse me." Charles turned his head slowly, his eyes cutting through the candlelight. "Yes, Margaret, you kept your own secret well. Your affair with my attorney's brother, wasn't it? 25 years ago, right after Evelyn's mother died." The words hit the table like a bomb. Margaret's breath caught. "How dare you?" "Oh, I dare," he said, voice trembling with age, but steady with purpose. "You spent your life pretending to be the perfect wife, the perfect hostess. But beneath the diamonds and dinner parties, you were as cruel as you were clever." Andrew slammed his napkin down. "This is insane." Clara pushed her chair back, tears welling up. "You can't do this." But Charles raised a hand, silencing them all. The oxygen machine hissed softly beside him. "You've all lived behind masks," he said. "But there's one person in this house who never wore one." He turned toward Evelyn. She froze under his gaze. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you are the only person in this house who ever loved without agenda." The words were simple, but they landed like thunder. For a brief moment, everything stilled. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Then Margaret stood, so suddenly her chair screeched against the marble. Her voice cracked with rage. "You ruined everything. Do you hear me? Everything." She grabbed her wine glass and hurled it across the table. The deep red liquid splattered across Evelyn's face and dress, dripping down her hands like blood. Evelyn gasped, too stunned to move. The room went deadly silent. Charles's head turned sharply toward his wife, his voice weak but furious. "Enough." Margaret was shaking now, tears streaking her mascara. "You humiliated me in front of them, in front of the world. You chose her." Charles tried to speak, but his voice faltered. "Margaret," his breathing grew ragged. I had to." The monitor beside him beeped faster. His hand gripped the edge of the table. "Dad!" Michael's voice broke. "Dad, breathe." The nurse rushed in from the hallway as Charles's body began to tremble. His eyes flicked toward Evelyn, pleading, almost peaceful. "Take care of them," he whispered, "even if they never deserve it." Then his body went limp. The monitor screamed. Margaret's wine glass rolled off the table and shattered on the floor. Clara's sobs echoed. Andrew shouted for help. Evelyn stood frozen, the red stain spreading down her dress, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. The final supper had ended, not with dessert, but with disaster. And as thunder cracked over the estate once more, Evelyn realized nothing in the Langston mansion would ever be the same again. The Langston mansion was silent, eerily so. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and still, as if the whole estate was holding its breath. Charles Langston lay in a master bedroom, surrounded by machines that beeped and blinked like dying stars. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath pulled from deep within a body that had given all it could. The doctors called it coma. Margaret called it a curse. Evelyn called it heartbreak. She stood at the doorway, watching him, her hands trembling at her sides. The man who had turned her life upside down in one night, the father she never knew she had, now hovered between worlds. Mr. Harlan Pierce, the lawyer, stood near the bed, reading from his briefcase. "Under South Carolina law," he said carefully, Mr. Langston's will become active in the event of incapacitation. That means, as of this moment, all legal and financial powers transfer to his appointed heir. He turned his gaze toward Evelyn. That's you, Miss Brooks. The room froze. Margaret straightened like a viper ready to strike. Excuse me. Per his final will and testament, Pierce continued, Evelyn Brooks inherits controlling interest in the Langston estate, as well as decision-making authority over his medical care. The silence that followed was heavy enough to break the air itself. Margaret's lips curved into a smile, so thin it could cut glass. That's not happening. She turned toward the two security guards at the door. Remove her from this house. Now. The guards hesitated, glancing between the trembling Evelyn and the calm, methodical lawyer. Pierce's voice was firm. Touch her, and you'll be arrested for trespassing on her property. This house legally belongs to Miss Brooks. Margaret's jaw dropped. This is insanity. Ma'am, the lawyer said evenly. I suggest you calm yourself. You no longer have authority here. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Margaret's voice shattered the silence. Get out, she screamed, her composure gone. You're not family. You're a fraud. You tricked my husband, you. Evelyn's voice was quiet but steady. He told the truth, Mrs. Langston. You're just angry it finally came out. Margaret's eyes flared. You think this is over? You have no idea what you've started. She stormed out, the echo of her heels ricocheting through the marble hallway. By morning, the story was everywhere. Camera vans lined the front gates. Reporters shouted through megaphones. Drones buzzed above the estate like mechanical hornets. Headlines screamed across every network. Billionaire's Maid inherits everything. Langston family in shock. Heiress or homewrecker. The scandal rocking Charleston's elite. Evelyn watched the chaos unfold from behind the upstairs curtains, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. The world had found out, and it wanted blood. In the living room below, Margaret was already spinning her web. Surrounded by cameras and microphones, she stood like an actress on her favorite stage, clutching a photo of Charles to her chest. My husband was a generous man, she said tearfully, her voice trembling on cue. But generosity can be twisted. This woman, this Evelyn Brooks, used his illness to manipulate him. My family and I are victims of a cruel deception. Beside her, Clara nodded dramatically, dabbing her eyes for effect. Andrew, however, was in a back room, making calls, dozens of them. I don't care how much it costs, he snapped in his phone. I want her name dragged through every paper, every blog, every screen. Destroy her. He called in political favors, old business allies, anyone who still owed him something. He had power, and he intended to use it. Meanwhile, Clara flooded social media with carefully curated evidence, old photos of Evelyn in her maid's uniform beside Charles, edited to look romantic. She paired them with captions like, was it love or something darker? Within hours, hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag Maid to Millionaire and hashtag Langston Scandal. The internet tore Evelyn apart, accusing her of everything from blackmail to witchcraft. But karma moved faster than gossip. A week later, Mr. Pierce received a call from the forensic accountants he'd quietly hired after the will was contested. Their findings hit like another explosion. Margaret Langston has been siphoning funds from the family trust for nearly 15 years, the accountant reported. Shell companies, false charities, offshore accounts. Tens of millions all gone. Pierce's lips thinned. Send everything to the court immediately. By the next morning, federal authorities had frozen every Langston account. Margaret's personal credit cards bounced. Her social club memberships were revoked. And the family's financial empire, built on deception, crumbled overnight. When the news broke, reporters swarmed again. This time, the headlines had changed. Langston matriarch under investigation for financial fraud. Truth turns tables. Former maid cleared as victim. Inside the mansion, Margaret tore through the study, shredding papers and smashing framed photos. Her empire, her image, was collapsing. Andrew slammed his fist against the wall. You did this to us, he shouted at his mother. Clara wept silently in the corner, scrolling through hateful comments directed at herself for defending a criminal matriarch. Evelyn stood outside in the garden, watching the chaos from afar. For the first time since the storm began, the air felt calm. The scent of jasmine drifted through the night. She looked up at the mansion, her father's mansion, and whispered softly, "You built this house on lies, but I'll build it again on truth." Behind her, cameras still flashed, and headlines still screamed. But for Evelyn Brooks, the real battle wasn't about money or property anymore. It was about reclaiming her name. And for the first time, she was winning. The Langston mansion was quiet that night, unnervingly quiet. The cameras outside had stopped flashing, the reporters had gone home, and the once buzzing estate now sat in darkness, heavy with secrets. Upstairs in the master bedroom, the rhythmic beeping of Charles Langston's heart monitor broke the silence, slow, faint, and uneven. The storm of the last few weeks had aged him even further. His face, pale under the low lamplight, was almost translucent. Evelyn Brooks sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't slept in 2 days. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the man who had changed her life and shattered it in the same breath. When the clock struck midnight, she rose to adjust his blanket. That's when she heard it, a faint rasp of breath, then his voice, hoarse and barely a whisper. Evelyn, her heart lurched. She leaned in close. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm right here, Mr. Langston." His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion crossed his face, then recognition. "You stayed. I promised I would," she said. "You shouldn't be talking, sir. You need to rest." But Charles shook his head weakly. "No more rest. Not yet. There are things I never said, things I need you to know." Evelyn hesitated. She could see the pain in his face, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on him. "You've told me enough," she whispered. "No," he said, voice trembling. "Not everything." He took a shaky breath, the oxygen machine hissing softly beside him. "Your mother, Delilah Brooks. She was the light in my life before the darkness found me." Evelyn froze, her throat tightening. "She was my nurse when I broke my leg in college," he continued, eyes distant with memory. "I was young, arrogant, certain the world belonged to me. She was gentle, kind, the only person who saw past my pride." A faint, bittersweet smile tugged at his lips. "I loved her, but I was a coward. When I found out she was pregnant, I ran. My family threatened to cut me off. Margaret was already circling like a hawk, and his voice broke. I let them convince me it was easier to forget her than to fight for her." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes. "You left her alone," she whispered. He nodded slowly, shame etched into every line of his face. "I did, and it destroyed her. I found out years later she died, still wearing the necklace I gave her. I thought keeping you close was redemption, but it was selfishness. I wanted to protect you while hiding the truth." His breathing grew shallower, but he reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "You deserve more, Evelyn. You deserved a father who was brave enough to claim you." Her tears spilled freely now. "I forgive you," she said, her voice trembling. "You gave me a truth I didn't know I needed." "That's enough." Charles stared at her for a long moment, his eyes soft with gratitude. Then something shifted. A flicker of fear passed across his face. "There's one more thing," he whispered. "Something you need to know." Evelyn's heart quickened. "What is it?" His gaze drifted toward the ceiling, his voice dropping to a breath. "There's another child, one you don't know about." The words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn froze. "Another?" she whispered. "Who?" But his hand slackened. His lips moved again, soundless. "Who, Charles?" she cried, leaning closer. "Please tell me." The monitor gave a long, shrill beep. And then silence. Evelyn's breath caught. No, not now, please." She pressed the nurse's call button, but it was too late. Charles Langston, the man who had upended her world, who had given her a name, a truth, and a burden, was gone. She sank into the chair beside him, her tears silent. The lamp flickered once, twice, as if even the house was mourning. But in that silence, his last words replayed in her mind like an echo she couldn't escape. There's another child, one you don't know about. By morning, the whispers had already begun. The staff talked in corners, their voices hushed but hungry. Another heir, one murmured. Who could it be? Margaret heard it first from the nurse. And within hours, she was in the parlor with Andrew and Clara, eyes blazing. He said what? Another child, Clara repeated, pale. Maybe he meant Evelyn misunderstood. Margaret laughed bitterly. Charles never said anything he didn't mean. There's another heir, somewhere. Maybe under our roof. Andrew's eyes narrowed. You think it's Michael? Margaret hesitated. It wouldn't surprise me. He's been defending her since day one. Maybe he's protecting his own secret. Clara gasped. You think Evelyn's brother is Michael? Don't say that out loud, Margaret hissed. If the press gets wind of this, it'll destroy us all. But it was too late. The rumor spread like wildfire, through staff, through friends, through the media that already feasted on the Langston scandal. Second heir mystery. Did the billionaire have another hidden child? Langston legacy in question. Who's the real successor? Evelyn read the headlines with a sinking heart. The world that had just started to calm was spiraling again. She couldn't sleep. Every creak of the mansion felt like a clue, every shadow like a secret. Was Charles talking about someone outside the family? Someone still in the house? Or worse, was it Michael? The thought alone made her sick. For the first time, Evelyn felt something colder than anger or grief. She felt fear, the kind that comes when you realize your father's last words might not have been a confession, but a warning. The day of the funeral dawned cold and gray, the kind of sky that felt heavy with unfinished business. Black limousines lined the gravel driveway of the Langston estate, and the mansion, once the setting for wealth and power, now stood draped in mourning. Cameras flashed from behind the iron gates. Reporters shouted questions, their voices cutting through the morning fog. Is it true Evelyn Brooks was written into the will? Is there another heir, Miss Brooks? How does it feel to inherit a billionaire's empire? Evelyn didn't answer. She walked past them in quiet grace, dressed in a simple black dress and veil. There was no entourage, no jewelry, no theatrics. Just her, the woman who had once dusted the Langston furniture, now walking as its rightful owner. Inside, the air was tense. The entire Langston family was gathered in the great hall, pretending unity for the cameras. Margaret sat rigidly on the front pew, her lips painted and eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Andrew and Clara flanked her, whispering furiously between forced smiles. Michael stood apart, hands clasped in front of him, his face pale with something deeper than grief. Charles's coffin rested at the center of the room, sleek, dark oak, polished to perfection. Beside it, framed photographs displayed his life. The businessman, the philanthropist, the father. None of them showed the man Evelyn had come to know in those quiet, guilt-ridden final weeks. As a minister spoke, Evelyn barely heard a word. Her mind replayed his last whisper like a haunting refrain. There's another child, one you don't know about. When the service ended, the family gathered in the study for the reading of the final statement. Reporters were kept out, but their presence loomed, waiting to devour whatever scandal might come next. Mr. Harlan Pierce, ever composed, placed a heavy metal box on the table. The hidden safe Charles had mentioned before his collapse. Its discovery had already shaken everyone. Margaret's knuckles whitened on the armrest. This circus has gone on long enough, Harlan. Let's just confirm what we already know. Pierce opened the safe and laid out its contents. Inside we found 2 items, he said slowly. A second will, and a sealed envelope. The room fell silent. Andrew leaned forward, voice sharp. A second will? Does that mean the first one's void? Pierce shook his head. No, it's identical to the first. It confirms Evelyn Brooks as the sole inheritor of the Langston estate and holdings. Margaret's face was drained of color. He really meant to give it all to her? Clara stood abruptly. This is madness. But Pierce raised his hand. There's something else. He picked up the sealed envelope. Aged, its edges worn. It was labeled, "For Evelyn." to be opened only after my death. The room held its breath. Evelyn hesitated, staring at the envelope. Her heart thudded so loudly she could hear it echo in her ears. Slowly, she took it from his hand and turned away from the others. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph, yellowed with age. A young woman, her mother, Delilah Brooks, sat on a park bench, smiling softly. In her arms was a little boy, no more than 3 years old. His face was unmistakable. Michael. Evelyn's breath caught. Her knees almost gave way. Charles's voice replayed in her memory. There's another child. Now she understood. Michael wasn't just her ally. He was her brother. Charles's other secret. She turned the photo over. In Charles's shaky handwriting, the words read, "My 2 greatest shames and my 2 greatest blessings." Tears blurred her vision. She folded the photo carefully, holding it to her chest. When she turned back, Margaret was watching her, and in that stare was everything Evelyn needed to know. Margaret had known. For years. "You knew," Evelyn said softly. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. The silence was answer enough. "You let me serve in this house," Evelyn continued, her voice trembling but strong. "You watched me clean your floors, raise your children, my own brother, and said nothing." Margaret's mask cracked for the first time. "I did what I had to," she said coldly. "You were the mistake. He was the secret I could control." Evelyn took a step closer. "You built your life on lies, Margaret, but it ends today." For once, the older woman had no reply. Later that evening, the family gathered once more, this time not as enemies, but as something broken, uncertain, human. Evelyn placed the photograph on the desk in front of Michael. He stared at it in disbelief. That's me." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "He loved your mother too. He just didn't have the courage to love out loud." Michael's eyes glistened. "That means we're brother and sister," she said softly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "What will you do now?" he asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. "What he couldn't. I'm ending this cycle of greed and silence." She glanced toward the portrait of Charles hanging above the fireplace. "Let's rebuild what he broke." She turned to Mr. Pierce. "Split the inheritance. Half goes to Michael. The rest, to charity in my mother's name." The lawyer blinked. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Completely." The next morning, as dawn painted the sky in soft gold, Evelyn walked through the Langston Gardens. The same gardens she had once tended in silence as a maid. Now, she walked freely. No uniform, no orders. Just peace. The world still whispered her name. The cameras still clicked beyond the gate, but none of it mattered. She paused beneath the old magnolia tree, lifting her face to the light. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. The storm had passed. The house, her house, stood still and calm behind her. And as the sun rose higher, Evelyn Brooks finally felt what her father had sought but never found. Not wealth, not legacy, freedom.